Sorry, I know it takes a couple minutes. Welcome to Northwest Health Foundation, everyone.
Thank you.
So Nicole, so far it's you and Dr. Henry represented. Is it your sense that we should just start on time, or would you typically wait for a little while? This is Peter, by the way.
I recognize your voice. I typically give people like 3 or 4 minutes, so, but I'm also open to starting right on time as well as we have a full agenda. Peter, did you hear from folks if anyone couldn't make it, or I heard from Ramon that he could not make it.
Right, I heard that Ramon wouldn't be able to make it, and then Seth, there was one other.
Janet Doherty Smith was going to try and call in.
And we do have other folks on the line. Are there any other subcommittee members who are on the line? Nope.
You might want to introduce people in the room while we're waiting, just so people on the line know who's in the room.
Okay, so we'll start out with that. So if folks in the room mind introducing yourself, and if you'd like to share your affiliation, that'd be great. Cheryl, why don't you?
Cheryl Myers, Chief of Staff for the Higher Education Coordinating Commission. Good morning.
Morning, Nicole. It's Danny Ledesma from the Governor's Office.
Good morning, Nicole. This is Helen Misadaga with the Center for Intercultural Innovation.
Cassandra Griffin, Upstream Public Health and the Healthy Kids Learn Better Coalition.
Morgan Allen with the Oregon School Board Association.
Sheila Anderson, Chair of Operation Easy.
I'm Dr. Dapo, Operation Easy. It's a program for the youth.
Seth Allen, staff, OEIB.
And then anyone on the line, if you could introduce yourself.
This is Debbie Karaski from Portland State University.
Okay, Nicole, so that sounds like everyone who's here or on the line. So it's 8:34. Maybe we'll wait one more minute and see if we get a couple other committee members, and then we'll start.
Okay, that sounds great.
Nicole, I produced a graphic organizer for the subcommittee. Do you have a copy of that?
Did you email it in the last 24 hours?
Okay, Seth's going to send it to you right now. It's pretty straightforward. It's really just a way to really organize my thinking as much as anything else. But Seth is emailing it to you. Do you have access to email?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I have. Great. Well, I'll go ahead and get us started. So good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here. And welcome to the Equity and Community Partnership Subcommittee. I appreciate you all being there. I'm in the university, I'm jealous, and excited to be joining you by phone. If at any point in time you all can't hear me, please let me know. And I will be relying heavily on Peter to help facilitate today, just because it's much easier as he's there in person. I want to just take a moment and acknowledge and appreciate David Martinez, who has been staffing and supporting this work, who has made a transition and moved on to OHSU to do more direct work with students in the community, but certainly want to appreciate his time that he supported this work, and also recognize that this has really been a year of transitions for us as a particular committee, and we recognize that we have had sort of a variety of different staffing support, and that has created a little bit of just catch up for us as a committee from meeting to meeting. So I just want to acknowledge that, but also share that I feel that we really have strong support going forward from Peter and Nancy and directed staff that will be joining. So we recognize that has created a few bumps along the way. We feel like we can have strong support going forward. Today, we also have built in a little bit of time on the agenda to look at our work plan because we are a little bit behind due to some transitions that we've experienced. We need to do some readjustment on that front. So today we're really having some important updates from other committees that do a lot of cross work with us. Peter has a really important conversation that he's going to begin with us and thinking about our role in partnering with the Outcomes and Investment Subcommittee to fully implement the equity lens. And then we will go through much of what has been our ongoing work of the year. So with that said, I would invite Peter to help us move on to agenda item number 2 and begin with the brief update.
Okay, thank you. And Nicole, we've been joined by some more folks. So I'm wondering if you just joined us and are in the audience, if you could introduce yourself. Starting with Serena.
Serena Stoudemire, Westlake, OEIB. Ingrid McDowell, Coalition of Communities of Color. Ali Thornlad, Paris.
We've gone around to the rest of the people, and do you want to?
Yeah.
Hi, Nicole. This is Julia Brim Edwards. I'm here.
Hi, Julia.
And Nancy, do you want to?
And welcome everyone else.
Yeah. And then we also have Shondine Garcia, who will be joining us in OEIB and doing research and policy. So she's here listening, learning, and it's great to have you.
Thank you.
So our first agenda item after the welcome and review of agenda is brief updates. And is there anyone here from the Early Learning Council to provide a brief update? Okay, well, we have Cheryl from Higher Education Coordinating Commission who has updated on a couple of items.
Sure. Good morning. I'm really happy to be here and just wanted to bring a couple of items forward. Certainly wanted to highlight the adoption of the equity lens by the Higher Education Coordinating Commission. A letter was sent out to all the presidents of all the campuses in regard that was signed by Dr. Golden, by Ben Cannon, and the governor, just reinforcing and reminding how we want to deploy the equity lens going forward. We had a chance yesterday to visit a little bit about how we're going to utilize that in budget preparation as well. And then additionally, to just share with the commission that we have, with the board, that we have engaged an Oregon fellow from the Hatfield School of Business to do a project over the summer in regard to doing a scan of national best practices for community outreach of underserved communities and how we might apply some of those best practices here in Oregon to look at the work and research that has been done over the last several years in that area, and then to develop really an engagement plan for potentially 2015 for outreach, particularly beginning with the fabulous list that the community of color, the Coalition of Communities of Color have collected, and I believe are also updating at the moment. So to begin with that. So particularly if you look at rural Oregon, whether it be churches, clubs, groups, where there's less of an organized voice of underserved communities, and in some ways I believe that they're even more dramatically marginalized because there isn't a number of organizations that have coalesced. So we've been busy and just wanted to share those brief thoughts. Thank you.
Madam Chair. Samuel Henry. I would appreciate, on behalf of the other hat that I have, the State Board of Ed,
Yes.
appreciate, we're having a retreat in August, and maybe we could get some of the info back, at least a preliminary look at that, because that's a really important part. And we were out most of last week in Ontario, Oregon, not Canada, and taking a look at one of the community charter schools there that does dual language.
Nice.
And has some real pieces that we would like to see connected up.
Wonderful, wonderful. We'd be happy to share preliminary findings.
Great.
And we are very excited about this project.
Any other questions from the board for Cheryl? Is it okay, Nicole, if I'm just facilitating? It seems natural since you're not here.
Yes, I'm inviting and appreciating you if
Okay.
you would do that, as I can't pick up on any social cues of anyone in the room.
Right, because we're all staring at your empty chair and waiting, so. Any other questions for Cheryl? Okay, thanks very much. So the third brief update is staffing changes. So just by way of introduction, again, my name is Peter Tromba. I work at OEIB as the Director of Policy and Research. My educational career has spanned pre-K all the way through post-secondary. I've taught at every one of those levels, and most recently been a school administrator in the K-12 system, middle school, high school, and central office. At every single one of the schools that I've been in, I've chaired our school's equity committee and have been immersed in the work as it applies to K-12 education for as long as I've been in the business. I was very, very honored to be asked to staff this committee, but especially honored because Nicole specifically said not for me not to do this for just a month or two, but to stay long-term. And I was thrilled to be able to say yes to that and interested in the work that we're going to be doing together as a committee going forward. And to that end, what I've been doing to apprise myself of the work that's gone on so far and to orient myself for this meeting and future meetings, I've been reading the past meeting minutes, looking at agendas, and interviewing folks who are involved in the work so far. And what turned out to be an organizer for myself and the work that's being done here, I've now included as something that we could use as a committee as a note-taking tool. So I've provided it for everyone as a handout. And I apologize if someone online has not seen this. We'll get this up. I was late in getting it to Seth, but if you're in the room, we do have copies here. And all it is a one-page document that has a table in it with some words in it, some italicized words in it, and then some blanks in it. And my invitation to committee members is, as we go through the agenda, to use this as a guide to look at the items that we're discussing and also have a place for you to write down questions or thoughts that come up for you around what is the ongoing work that we're doing and how does it line up with our purpose and also with the suggested foci that we have as a group. And the one other thing I'll note about the handout, and then I'll just let folks use it as they will, is the way I oriented myself and the way the handout's oriented is at the very top is the purpose of the committee off the website. And that's an interesting statement here. At some point I'd love to deconstruct and dive into this statement and unpack it a little bit because it's really interesting and dense. A lot of great information in there, but I've included that at the top. But then what I've done in the table is there are 4 suggested foci for the subcommittee. So the first one is to monitor and support implementation of the equity lens. So that's gotten its own column. A second one is a policy recommendations aimed at improving accountability. So that's another column. And then there's a third column, policy recommendations about incenting and elevating engagement. And then finally at the bottom, there was a 4th focus on the website, providing a highly visible platform for engagement from voices. And I put that on the bottom to represent a platform visually, just to show, or at least in my eyes, maybe just to show that there's this platform that we need to create, a visible platform of engagement. And I'm not sure to what degree we've done that, but I think it would be important to remember it. So I drew it on the bottom as a foundation. And then in the boxes, if it's in regular type, like monitor disaggregated progress, that's something that I inferred from reading or talking to Nicole or to Nancy or to David, that's work that's already going on. If it's in italics, it's new or proposed work, some of which are going to be agenda items today. So you'll be hearing about a number of these italicized things, others of which are going to be future items. And my hope is that at the end, as we get towards the end of our 2 hours together and start talking about work plan, that we'll start from this document, start from our purpose, start from our existing work and our foci so that we see where we're at in each of these areas, where we need to really push, where we're almost done, where we're doing new work. So that's the purpose of the document, and hopefully it's helpful for the subcommittee. And we'll address it specifically if you have questions about it when we get to the work plan. But right now, if there's a burning question that folks have that you need to ask right away to get it off your mind, please ask. Nicole, have you managed to get a copy of it?
Yeah, I have it pulled up on my iPad. Admittedly, the formatting, I think, is translating a little odd, but I think what I'm hearing is that it's really a way for us to track our ongoing work and track thoughts so that we're not having committee members and community members share valuable input and then losing it between sessions. So if that is the intent, then I'm excited for it. Is that an accurate read on the intent?
Absolutely accurate. Okay. Okay, well then, agenda item number 3, and let me just say for the committee, I'm so honored to do this. I'm nervous as heck. I want to do a really, really great job for you, and so I'm not quite as polished as I'd normally be, but that's because of my interest to do a great job, not anything else. So number 3.0 is a agenda item that's come to us from the Outcomes and Investments Subcommittee. And just to back up a second, just to make sure everybody's oriented in the same place for this discussion, the Oregon Education Investment Board has 4 subcommittees, 3 of which meet on a monthly basis. One of those subcommittees is best practices and transitions. A second subcommittee is outcomes and investments. And a third subcommittee is this one, equity and partnerships. And when you are at the office at the OEIB discussing these subcommittees, you see really that the work of the groups is very, very different in terms of the focus, in terms of the form, in terms of the intent. There's a lot of differences between the committees. They're not really parallel in a lot of ways, and I think it's something we might want to explore more deeply as we talk about our work plan, is what is unique about the Equity and Partnerships Committee that we need to make sure that we think about as we do our work. I also help support the Outcomes and Investments Subcommittee. And that committee, to a large degree, does not come up with their own ideas or their own initiatives. Not that they don't have ideas or initiatives, they have lots of them. But a lot of the work of the Outcomes and Investments Committee is taking input from different agencies, different commissions, different councils, different boards, and taking that input and trying to cohesively link that input together in funding recommendations and policy recommendations that make sense. So for instance, when you're at the Outcomes and Investments Subcommittee, one of the questions that comes up there is, how do different agencies partner together to economically do the work that they both have interests in? So we talk about economic things like partnerships or sharing of resources or maximizing of resources or making sure that we don't duplicate efforts, things like that. And so the Outcomes and Investments Subcommittee has that unique character. It's got that economic focus. And what we had scheduled to do for this year for Outcomes and Investments was ask different agencies and different boards to present month by month what are the 1 or 2 or 3 top requests for funding, whether it's strategic investments or changes in the funding formula. And we asked those groups to come to Outcomes and Investments. And we're going to talk, there's a handout from Outcomes and Investments that we're actually going to go over in a little bit of detail in just a second. But originally what Outcomes and Investments had was the Equity and Partnerships Subcommittee presenting to Outcomes and Investments. So equity would come once, and we would have our hour or hour and a half or what have you, and we would sit before that brother or sister group and talk to them about our ideas for investments. And we'd be done. And we would be treated identically to a lot of other committees. And while there's nothing wrong with that conceptually, as we dug into the idea and processed it at the staff level at OEIB, and also in discussing this with Nicole, we realized that really the Equity and Partnership Subcommittee is not just another committee. It's not just, and no offense to the other committees out there, they're doing great work. But each of those other committees generally has a single focus. For instance, the Accelerated Learning Committee has a focus on making sure that kids get college credits in high school. And there's other committees out there. The Higher Education Coordinating Commission is focused on higher ed and 40-40-20. Our Equity and Partnership Subcommittee is not focused on one particular thing. We're focused on everything. The equity lens should be something that is explicitly not only adopted by other boards and commissions, but causes action in those agencies to forward our equity goals. And so that when we rethought the work of the Outcomes and Investments Committee is really Outcomes and Investments needs the Equity Committee to be a partner, not just another presenter, but to be a partner to listen and help aggregate or reformulate or push back on some of these recommendations that we're getting so that the final recommendations have been vetted in a particular way with a particular lens so that they can be better. So what we've been asked by the Outcomes and Investments Subcommittee, and we're going to get to the handout in a second, is actually specifically to join that group to do that work. And so that's the general topic. And what I'd like to do is show you, if you open up, if you look on your packet, the first page in the packet is a presentation template and instructions, Outcomes and Investments Subcommittee. And the second handout is the Outcome and Investments Subcommittee Schedule 2014. I want to start with the schedule because I want to point out exactly where we are proposed to be included. And then I want to move back to the handout with the questions on it. So if you look at the schedule, you'll see that starting May 29th, in just a few weeks, different groups are going to be presenting to Outcomes and Investments. You have another meeting June 12th, June 24th, and then August 6th, we are scheduled for a 2-hour joint meeting with Outcomes and Investments Subcommittee to join the Equity Partnerships Group, for us to join that group and to go through a process that has not yet been determined. I'll have to be honest, we've not really thought through the process yet, but I have some ideas about the kinds of questions we would be asking, but that's what we would do on August 6th. And one thing I want to mention is that the Outcomes and Investments Subcommittee has invited this group to come to every single one of the meetings on the page. So I don't want folks to think in this committee or in the audience that it's inappropriate to have this conversation all the way along. It is appropriate. As a matter of fact, we're going to be talking about issues relating to equity and partnerships because of our template at every single meeting. So it'd be great if more members could join us. I'll certainly be there. But go ahead, Nicole.
Well, I may be asking the question too soon, but I guess is proposed sort of mechanism to provide input on the equity lens that we just come to every meeting? I mean, it seems like we might need a little bit of a different structure than that. That's a huge, I mean, I certainly, as we were thinking about this together, think that this is a great opportunity and a great use for the equity committee, but I think it's a hard sell to say to all of our committee members, you now have to just go to a whole other set of meetings. So it seems like there might be a different, better structure if we really wanted people's input and ability to participate. And the other piece that I think is really important for us to talk about is, and we chatted a little bit about this, Peter, but I had requested from Rob some information specifically outlining how much of the $75 million that has been spent was actually invested in strategies to improve outcomes specifically for targeted communities. I mean, I got kind of some rough answers, but it was very discouraging. And I think that, you know, before we jump into this process about forward, we need to examine that data as well, and then think about how we can build a process that will learn from mistakes in the past, per se. And then the other piece I would say is, it seems like other folks are working on proposals to build as part of the budget next year, and this equity committee has not been invited to weigh in or even propose anything, and I'm curious about that process as well.
Okay,
That's really 3 questions.
Yeah, so taking them in order, actually out of order. Your second question about the existing strategic investments is agenda item number 4. So we are going to, I've got some information from ODE on that, and we do have a process and some information about the existing strategic investments and future design of future. So that is going to come up. So if it's okay, I'd like to hold it till the next agenda. With regard to the first question, I would like to propose a process that we would be using and then get some committee discussion on what I've proposed. So I feel like I'm still in the preamble to all this, Nicole, and then I want to put out the key question, and then we'll dig into it. But I want to reaffirm that the intent of the Outcomes Committee is to invite participation from members of this group in any and all of the meetings that we have on this page. But where we're not requiring, where we're inviting particular participation is at the August 6th meeting. And at that August 6th meeting, and well before it, what members of this subcommittee would be getting is the individual proposals from different agencies and commissions that have been pre-analyzed against some key questions that are straight out of the equity lens regarding what data do we have to support certain conclusions that are in those requests, how do the proposals avoid unintended consequences. There's a variety of questions that we're going to pass each of these recommendations through at the May meeting, the June meeting, and the July meeting. So if a member of the Equity and Partnership Subcommittee was unable to attend any of these other meetings, what they would still get is a digest of those proposals that's been pre-analyzed to some extent against an equity frame. And you'd be coming into that meeting with some of that work done so that you're not coming in cold, you're not having to read dozens and dozens of things. To some extent it's been pre-analyzed. I just wanted to make sure folks understood that there's an invitation to attend any and all of these meetings.
So I'm going to suggest, just building on Nicole's observation, is because we have this committee, so I chair another committee, and then we have the full OEIB meetings in addition to a whole host of other things. And that to be more strategic in our engagement. So one way you could do that is, so for example, for each of these, the May 29th, the 12th, and the 24th, ask that the presenters, as part of their presentation, show how their presentation or their proposal or initiative aligns with the equity lens. And then it's not us just being present to ask the question, but people thinking about it as they're putting it together about the alignment. Just speaking for myself, I can't commit to coming to any of these meetings. The meeting on the 6th, for what it's worth, that's the sort of the last week before most school staff come back. It's not a great, just a lot of district people are gone and school people. But I think if you do it that way, then we have a much easier an efficient way to look about how the presentation does or doesn't align or contemplate. And I also think we'll get different proposals, and it framed differently if you ask that question on the front end versus asking it once they've already presented.
Right.
Peter, this is Nancy Golden. I think, and I know, I just want to get explicit something that wasn't said, and that is, just because we're suggesting this group comes in with another pair of critical eyes, it doesn't mean that every other committee isn't responsible for looking at everything through the equity lens.
Right.
So, that's the first piece, which would get at what you're saying, Julia. But then the second piece is just another group of people who haven't been involved in that committee as deeply, so they can have a fresh pair of eyes around the issue.
Thank you. So I do want to point folks to the second handout that's under the agenda that's called Presentation Template and Instructions for Outcomes and Investments Subcommittee. This is currently just a bulleted list. We're in the process of making it into a more of a graphic organizer. But what this is, these are instructions to each of the groups who are going to be presenting regarding, it's almost like a not scoring guide type thing, but it's a set of things that they need to hit in their presentation. And if you look down at the bulleted list, you've got number 4, how does this strategy demonstrate the priorities and values in the OEIB equity lens?
Also number 3.
And number 3, a number of these actually I think relate to the charge of this subcommittee and to the equity lens. And we, in addition, just yesterday, Danny Ledesma led us through a process at our P through 20 group of even more specifically asking more granular questions of each other about one particular initiative that we had on the table, and we spent an hour on it, analyzing with a finer and finer tooth comb, how would you look at a proposal with an equity lens, looking at some very, 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 very specific types of questions. And I found that to be a very worthwhile process, and it would cause a group to get more specific when they present something. Because it's one thing to say, I considered the equity lens. It's another thing to say, like Danny asked us yesterday, if you have a new proposal, what are the possible unintended consequences of that proposal, which is straight from our equity lens? Or if say you're using an equity lens, what specific data are you using to show that the proposal that you're bringing is going to explicitly address the needs of particular underserved populations? It's taking the general question and getting more specific. And the answer might be, wow, I don't know. But that's a good answer too, because it causes reflection and work on these committees that they have to go back and do it. So I think, Julie, in answer to your question, and I think also to Nicole's, we are working to make sure that those groups pre-analyze these requests against the equity lens, and then we're going to push it even another level when they bring that information to us. Does that answer?
And Peter, I think I asked a lot of questions, and I apologize, and some of them were probably too soon because you were going to get to it, but I do think this piece about the equity, I think this is important work for the equity committee to do, and I also think we need to have a conversation about this particular committee having an opportunity to suggest and make funding initiative suggestions as well, and we have not yet been invited to do that, and I'm not sure how that process is playing out for other people and other groups, but I think that also needs to be part of the discussion.
So I apologize for that, Nicole. You asked that before, and I missed that question. And I may ask for support from Danny and or Dr. Golden to give some feedback on that. But I'll share what I have to say about that. When we get to the work plan or even the note-taking sheet, I think one of the questions where we need to ask is any of the ongoing work ripe or teed up, or whatever the correct language is, for us to be able to turn that into a request for strategic funding or legislative concepts or policies that this group is ready and feels like it's matured to a point where we can produce that recommendation. And we have a number of ways that this committee can give that input. There's no reason that we cannot give it in the same way that other groups give it to outcomes and investments. It also can be something that I or Nancy or Danny carry forward within our P through 20 group as a proposal. Not just a strategic investment, but it also might be something that is talking about the existing formula-based funding that schools and districts, colleges, community colleges, universities get I mean, I think everything is on the table. I'll say as a rookie, the way I see this happening is there's multiple strands of discussions that have just started, and there's multiple places that this committee can have input. And the final place is that the OEIB full board itself ends up giving funding recommendations, and to me, that's going to be heavily influenced by things that are coming from this group, if they're mature and ready. And I didn't want to be presumptuous enough coming into the meeting to conclude, just based on what I've read and talked about so far, that this one proposal, say on GED, is ready versus another proposal which may not be. But it's quite possible by the end of the 2 hours today, that'll be much clearer to us about what's ripe. So I'm just going to ask,
Okay.
is that?
No, I appreciate that. I just don't want our kind of engagement at this level as an additional set of eyes in the support structure to preclude us from the other type of important work. As long as they both can happen, I think that's great.
I do. I'll foreshadow our work plan discussion by saying one thing, is that there is a limited number of hours in the day. And I think it's a really good question to ask where the highest leverage effects are that this group can have as we look at the ambitious work plan that we're going to be putting together. But I completely concur. And I just want to see if Dr. Golden or if Danny, is there anything you want to add? Because I'm...
Well, I would say if you're looking at best practices committee, they're in about the same place. They've been working around a number of best practices, and now at their last meeting, they've tried to say, so of all of these, where's the one that will have the biggest capacity to make a difference in meeting the 40-40-20 goal, particularly for our students who sit in the opportunity gap. So, you know, I think we're in process, and I think we do need to make sure, you know, that's one of the laser focused things we're thinking about right now. And I guess the other thing I just want to encourage people is there's so many great ideas, but we can't do them all. And so, you know, it's really about finding what's the thing that's going to build the biggest capacity the most, I think. So, Danny, do you?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I wouldn't think that there's anything that would preclude this group from suggesting something, knowing that it would sort of like go in the mix as we sort of try to think about how to prioritize things. I would also just say that, and sort of piggyback on what Nancy said earlier about sort of not only were the committees doing the review, but I think we're really trying to build the equity muscles, if you will, of the agency staff, so that as the proposals are being developed, that the staff is really thinking differently about equity, so that there's a sort of like a sort of three-layer level of review around equity, so it's really embedded throughout.
So there was one question that hasn't been answered, which was about the August 6th date. Julia, you brought that up as possibly a really bad date, and if that's a key question for the members of the committee, because that's, and then now's a good time to change it or to discuss it, so.
Well, and then maybe I'm the only person, but I know a lot of the school community, so that's the 1 week where there's no contact between high school coaches and athletes. So lots of people take time off, and then also it's the sort of the start or the end of the window where administrators are on break, and so people come back sort of later in August. I just mentioned it as a time that there's lots of people who plan to be out of town during that time period, but maybe it's just me.
Well, other discussion among committee members, because this has to be a date we can get as many or all of our group together.
So I think the question would be, who really needs to be present, and who are we? I mean, and it'd be interesting to know what districts do. The district I was superintendent of, 1st of August, all of the administrators were back, all of the district level leaders and principals were back, and to me, you know, that's an important group. I think the question is, do we want teachers to be back so they can weigh in? And that's also a really important thing. I think then we've got to find out a way to really make sure we get some present and get their input, because probably because of when we have these meetings, but we don't get a lot of weigh-in from staff other than the leaders. Just so partly it's like, you know, who's the audience we really need there to figure out.
The other thing I would say is if we have the retreat the following week, you're basically expecting that people aren't going to be gone any of the weeks of August. I mean, because then as you get closer to the start of the school year. So just something to think about.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely concur with Julia that it's like prime time family vacation time for lots of people. So it just creates a hardship. So I think either thinking about how to do it the same, very close to the retreat maybe, or so that we wouldn't be imposing that folks who really want to be good participants essentially can't do any August activities.
Did you want to weigh in on?
In terms of like the scheduling of like the work that Whitney had to do to sort of get everyone's schedule together, I don't envy anyone. I think I might suggest that the August 6th date would be the most important date for the equity subcommittee, or sometime around that, whether it's closer to the retreat date or not. And that the sort of review, the ongoing review as people are presenting could happen during your regular meeting times during the preceding months. But that I would encourage that I think it would be really valuable for this group to have some time where you could be really focused on dialogue with the Outcomes and Investment Subcommittee. So if there's a way to sort of better work out the date on the 6th, that would be the most important, as opposed to the 29th and the 12th and the 24th. It seems like that time to work with the committee, which we may have to go back and try to get their schedules back in order as well.
And that's our regular meeting date in August, right? That's why that's there. Yeah. So it would have come up even if it was.
Yeah. Well,
and I'm not. I think it's critical, this work. So I hear what Danny's saying. We can take another cut at a day. Nancy, I'm sorry.
It's just, we've now have an expanded concept of who should be at that meeting, and so I think people from this committee weren't aware of that as much as people who were serving on outcomes.
Right.
Seems like we might be able to get it close to the retreat. That's a really
That's
great
what I hear, yeah.
suggestion, yeah.
And to me, it would be great if it was in advance of the retreat, because I think it's going to generate some very interesting discussion. And so, Dr. Henry, did you want to comment on the date there?
No, for us 9-month faculty people in higher ed, this is an interesting consideration. I think most are out in, for summer school, and 12-month faculty and the 12-month administrators in higher ed will be around. I think that would be our primary audience. I guess the rest of us sort of have to scramble. So I think we need to just pick some dates, try to look for what we can do in terms of the best possible spread. But I would again remind us that higher ed is a partner here, and we've always had problems with the higher ed schedule and the K through 12 schedule, but this brings it into a sharper focus.
Well, we will work on that and get that information back. So with regard to the Outcomes and Investment Subcommittee invitation, maybe I should have done this in the very beginning, and I think we just naturally led into a discussion, but I'm interested in the subcommittee's feedback to the whole notion. Is there anything about this model? Because we've already questioned now the model quite a bit, and what's the ongoing participation going to be? What are the presenters being asked to do? But are there other thoughts? Because it's not a fully done deal until both committees agree with how they're going to partner. So I'm very interested right now, and I'll continue to be interested even after the meeting, of thoughts that this group has about the best way to engage. Now that you understand the issue and the intent, the best way to engage in this process. And maybe you have more questions or...
So just a thought I have. I support, I think, periodic engagement. I like Nicole's idea of having us also have the ability to originate some concepts. But one thing I think we need to be really careful of is that we're the ones that are sort of the enforcers or the ones that raise it. Really, ideally the way it works is every committee views that as integral to their work, and it doesn't need necessarily our committee there to raise the question or to have it be aligned. That, I think to have it be sustainable, to have it be deeply embedded, it's the Outcomes and Investment Subcommittee needs to view that as integral to their mission, not because we showed up or we asked the question.
Yeah, but personally, I appreciate that a great deal. And one thing I'm seeing, I think it goes back to something that Danny said about working with agencies, is generally I see more and more awareness and intent, but still lack of experience, knowledge. And so I don't sense, and maybe I'm wrong about this, the enforcer role as the thing that people are seeing, but maybe the expertise role. In other words, I want to make this difference. I've learned about the issue. I'm a member of an agency. I'm in power. I have some ability to do things, but I need to take that next step to figure out how, or I need to be led through a process to help me do it a little bit better. But I do take that point, and it's a good thing to bring back to the outcomes and investments.
So why don't we go around to the rest of the committee?
Okay. So other thoughts about the whole notion of working together? How it might look, structure, format. Samuel?
I think we use this and we go forward. I think we'll modify as we go along. I think there's a growing recognition of the significant role that equity must play. I think there's still a role for us to play, not as the sheriff, but as the chief reminder sometimes about what goes on. And I'm going to use an analogy. I hope not to offend anybody, but my dad was an old Pentecostal minister. He's passed on now, but he used to say the difference, it was like breakfast, where the chicken made an investment, but the hog made a real commitment. And not to get into vegan and a whole bunch of other things there. But we have been the chief minders of this equity role that we all said we want to play. And I would not like to see us step back from our continuing commitment as being the chief reminder. I don't think we're going to do that. But I think to the extent that we're going to be successful, and particularly as we look at the population and demographic changes that are coming along, it's going to have achieving 40-40-20 is going to have dramatic impact on communities of color and rural communities in the state of Oregon. And that focus, that sense of mission, that comes from people who are around this table and some other tables has got to be brought back in emphatic ways to our colleagues. And I do not mean to disparage them, but when they sit and they say, well, you invest in this and there's this outcome, to them there's that kind of correlation, and it's a very honest participation. But for us, it's a lot more than just a correlation. It's lifeblood. And so I want to just put that in there, not suggesting that they're not as concerned, but suggesting that we have the continuing obligation to remind that if we are going to reach our vision, it's a high level of concern. So I'll shut up.
No, thank you very much. Nicole?
Yeah, and I think I agree deeply with both what Julia and Dr. Henry said. I don't want to be the equity police, and I think that's not going to create long-term success for us if we're the only ones. And so I think building the deep infrastructure piece and then building that capacity and expectation on every committee is going to be critical to long-term sustainability. And at the same time, he's shared about good intent, but expertise is a really consistent and constant effort. I mean, I regularly see folks who are trying, who will answer questions about the equity.
Oh, no. Whoops.
Nicole, did we lose you?
She'll be back.
Yeah.
She was just getting to something.
She was.
I know.
Yeah.
You're working with her stuff.
What's that?
Julia's off, so we're trying to get her back on the line.
Yeah, she's gonna have to come.
Okay.
She knows she
It's her shop. She knows the number. So just to, in the moment before she gets on, so we'll be looking at date. I took notes in the sense of the committee, and I really appreciate the, here we go.
Sorry, I just got kicked off.
No problem.
I was in a very deep thought there.
We were hanging on your every word.
What I was saying was sort of a good intent, and you'll even hear people, referencing or even quoting parts of the equity lens, and some of the actual work is in direct contradiction with the equity lens. And so people just, they're trying to use the language, but, we're really trying to remedy 150 years of significant inequality in an entire institution and bureaucracy that is built fundamentally on, unequal values and beliefs. So it's going to take a big push for a while. So I think we just have to kind of keep saying we don't want to be the equity police, and we actually want everyone to join us in this movement. And we also, have to be willing to say some hard things and really pay close attention, because intent does not often translate into equitable actions. And in fact, sometimes, good intent can translate into the worst outcomes and actions if we're not really careful and thoughtful. So we're just going to have to be really vigilant and thoughtful and, kind of forgiving and gracious to a point, but also direct about different outcomes for kids at the same time, which is not easy.
Okay, thank you very much. So that's, we'll be back to you on that item. So item number 4.0 is a discussion about the strategic investments and also measures for the strategic investments. So again, I'm going to give a little bit of a preamble, and then we'll check in and see if folks have questions, and then we'll dig into some work on this. So first off, I want to get my handout straight. So first off, just so we're all clear, the last long session for the beginning of the biennium, there were two bills that together denoted a series of strategic investments. One of those bills is focused directly on student outcomes, student services, and things like that. And one is focused on staff outcomes that ultimately are supposed to affect student outcomes. And we use the numbers of those bills. I'm not going to use them because why would you memorize numbers of bills? But it's a good thing to think about one set of strategic investments targeted directly at students, one more at staff. And the question that Nicole and I originally talked about, and she referenced earlier when she asked me or talked about numbers, had to do with what amount of money in the strategic investments is specifically designated to work on particular issues, and in the case of this committee, particular issues involving equity or equitable outcomes. And so that was my first question back to the ODE, the Oregon Department of Education, and I've seen they have a great slideshow, and if members of the committee are interested, I can send it. You've probably seen it. It was at the OEIB. It's been presented in other places. Sarah Pope and Rob Saxton do a presentation of all the different investments, where they're done across the state, and so on. And underneath that PowerPoint are hundreds of individual grants that have gone out, way more than I really realized until I started digging into this, to school districts, other public school agencies, and then community-based agencies throughout the state. And what I produced, but don't have for you right this second, but I'm happy to get it maybe into a slightly cleaned up form, is a list of every single grant that's been awarded so far. And so just the quick answer to Nicole's question is that $48 million has gone out the door for strategic investments as of April 2014, and 1.2 of that 48 is targeted to culturally responsive teaching. And I believe that's entirely K through 12, although I could be wrong on that, but I don't believe that there's any of that for post-secondary. So at your first blush, in terms of answering the question that Nicole raised or this group has raised, is 1/45 of the investment, maybe 1/40th, has been spent on culturally responsive teaching. And we can respond and talk about that in a second. It's probably not what you would wish the number was. However, I want to say that in digging into each of these investments, and I'll pick one in particular that I spent hours on yesterday, which is STEM. In the STEM side, we've got three kinds of strategic investments. These things called STEM hubs, community-based activities that involve education and other partners, STEM activities, which could be nonprofits or schools, and then STEM schools, which are 4 schools around the state. In every single case, the STEM grants require that the students and teachers involved in those grants make progress towards goals, and the data for those goals must be disaggregated and must show closing of opportunity gaps for students. So it's an interesting question when you ask, at first blush, how much of the strategic investments have gone to equity? Well, you say 1.2 out of 48 million, not very much. But what I'm discovering as I research it more is every one of the grants presupposes, and the degree to which this is being done, granted, is going to be different from grant to grant. It's a lot of work to make this happen across hundreds of grants. But the point is that the RFPs that people responded to and the work that's going on in terms of measures is data that's to be disaggregated by group, and the purpose is to close those gaps. So one way to look at...
Peter, I just have one clarifying question. So the data already has to be, that's already a policy and has been for quite some time. It was even a policy under No Child Left Behind that data be disaggregated. And the goal has always been that we close the achievement gap. So I guess having that as a requirement and part of an RFP is not new business. It's been that way for 30-some years and has not necessarily produced that outcome. So I'm just, I guess I'm not getting what you're saying, that somehow that because that's happening, that somehow an equity investment or may improve equity outcomes, even though that never happened before when that's been a RFP requirement.
So point taken, and I think it's part of what we're going to do in terms of our activity in a minute is discuss, is dig into those measures issues in a more specific way. But I guess I do want to say that and this is just how these people have been showing up at meetings asking me about data. There's a lot of intent at the ODE in terms of the people that they've hired to make this a priority in a way that seems very different than other types of grants I've participated in. That's not a guarantee. I think it's a really interesting question about this first set of grants, how we're going to hold folks' feet to the fire if that's our work, or how we're going to monitor it. But I do see a high-level intent at the ODE on this issue. And from what I understand, it's higher than has been there before. The other thing I want to say is that on the little handout that I gave you all when we started, all the way on the right-hand side in italics is a note that in the future, that we should have some assistance in designing strategic investments, maybe in a way that's not just replicating what we've done over the last 30 years. For instance, the RFP process itself may be an institutional barrier to equitable practices. I think that's a very thought-provoking and rich question, is how does the way that you write an RFP and give that money away end up playing out as a positive or a negative towards equitable outcomes? And there may be other things that we can do in the design of these that can make the outcomes better. Where we are today, May 7th, 2014, is $40 million has gone out the door. The RFPs for those $40 million of grants do call for equitable work. And what we have an opportunity to do right now is to inform those grant managers at the ODE exactly what kind of interim measures we should be getting from those grants now that are probative or dispositive towards the final outcomes and the final results that these grants are going to get when they're completed.
So I'd want to know, so what's the like sort of first set of data that would come back out? And I think you can say, you know, our goal is to be, you know, move the dial with this particular group, but I think for us, what we should be looking at is whether they actually have done that, because it's not a question, to me, it's not a question of whether activities or money is spent, but whether they actually are making progress. So what I want to know is when we'd have our first cut at data, and use that as sort of a guide to if you need adjustments in the design on the front end.
So that's an
I'm
ultimate.
sorry, Julia, maybe Peter or Julia, if you could summarize. I had a really hard time hearing your full comments, Julia.
Yeah, so what I was saying, Nicole, is that you can have the grant set up with we intend to undertake these activities with these groups of students or communities, and that in and of itself isn't going to probably provide us with a lot of new data, but probably what would be most informative is to know when we'd have sort of the first cut at some sort of either interim measurements or a series of measurements, so you can start seeing the trends of how the activities and the money is actually having an impact on students, if any. And then we can use that to design if needed, to design on the front end, maybe making recommendations on the investment design process.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. And I think even just, I'd be interested, you know, Peter, it's great to hear you to describe people having really good intent and desire to do this work, but I guess I'm just, I mean, 1.2 million out of 45 million is terrible. And I mean, I don't know, I mean, 38% of the kids we're talking about are kids of color. And we've spent a lot of time at OEIB talking about equity and closing the gap, and those investments don't match those values, and they don't match the values of our equity lens at all. And so I'm just curious, you know, it's great to hear about the intent, but I mean, what are the conversations about the outcomes we have so far in our investments? And I'd love to hear kind of Julia and Sam and Nancy's reaction to, you know, just that one measurement of dollars spent, considering one of our values in the equity lens is we spend our money on the things that we value.
So one thing, Nicole, that I'd want to see before making a judgment is, and I'm trying to recollect back to when, are you there, Nicole?
We lose Nicole again?
Oh, I'm here. I just keep putting you guys on mute.
Okay, sorry. So one thing I'd want to see, Nicole, is my recollection is when the grants went out, that, and this again, I may be remembering incorrectly, but that there was more of an emphasis on sort of the geographic dispersion of the grants to demonstrate that they were statewide, not just focused in one area. But I guess I would, before making a judgment on whether that 1 million amount is sort of representative of the grants, I'd like to look at the grants, go back and look at them from a different perspective, less about geographic, but more about the composition of the districts that received the grants and what they were for.
I think it gets complicated because I actually dug a little deeper into this, and you're right, there was a real effort to do geographic work, but even within those resources given to districts, even looking for districts who said, and I'm in Malheur County and 50% of my kids are Latino, therefore I'm going to do X with the Latino population, a lot of districts did not do that. Because a lot of our 7 most ethnically diverse counties are rural districts. And so even with a rural equity lens, you would still think that there would be some real investments in communities of color and rural communities. And I didn't see that. The STEM, a lot of the STEM investments, there's sort of language like we want this to impact kids of color, and yet largely the organizations funded were organizations who have no track record serving communities of color well. Or at all.
Want to not respond, but just suggest a couple of things. One is that the grant process, and we need more than to look at what the dollars were invested in some specific kinds of pieces. And in order to do that, and I know Peter had said that he had started to do that, you need to look at grants, you need to look at their purposes, you need to look at their outcomes or potential outcomes, and you need to look at the kind of money invested in there. And I'm hoping we're going to get that kind of report. I'm almost sure we're going to get that kind of reporting out. And so putting out the 1.3, I'm a little hesitant to do that or to underscore that because the way that the grant process works suggests that there are some other ways to have equity outcomes supported and incentivized rather than what you can directly tie to certain specific outcomes. Now, I'm not trying to talk around it. I'm just trying to say that in education there, you put out grants. There are a variety of different kinds of ways that you're able to look at it. And that brings me to the second point, and that is we've got those grants out the door, which means that then the groups mobilize, and it's 14 to 16 months before we get good data about what's happening in terms of really affecting kids. And that doesn't mean that we aren't very careful in our scrutiny of what's going on, but it means that if we want to know what's going on with a grant that went with partners that are in Malheur County, we need to stay tuned for a while, and we need to course correct as we're getting to a place, but we need to also give them a chance to work. And that's not something that happens, you put X amount of dollars and you go to the supermarket and you buy a certain amount of products. So I want us to realize that there are a lot of inputs, that there are some significant efforts that have gone on in ODE, and as a member of the OSB, we approved each of the processes for these grants, and we were very persnickety about their equity outcomes, but that's a piece that's got to work over the next year to year and a half before we even have the kind of data that we can say something was successful. I don't mean to take any of the energy off of doing the kinds of things we need to do in terms of looking at what's going on, but a reality is that if we look at the NISA school district in Eastern Oregon, we're not going to know how their 62% Latino population did with the kinds of funds that were issued last month for a while.
Peter, so what I think is really important is we talked a lot about data and interim data, but I'm really interested in an analysis of what did these grants say they were going to do. Are those the best practices to get to equity? Because data is great, but if we're not also looking at the strategies, one thing I think about, just because I was involved in this in Springfield before I came here, is the collaboration grants. One of their main thing is recruiting and hiring and retaining teachers of color so they reflect the faces of our children. Now, I don't think that was in the 1.2 million, but it's a really critical thing. On the other hand, I know some of the people in those grants, one of the key strategy is working with 8th graders, which is great, but you don't want to have to wait, 8th grade, you don't want to have to wait 12 years to get teachers who reflect the students. I know there's other people who actually went to their prospective university and got the names of graduates from like English, social studies, really great graduates, people of color who haven't gotten jobs yet, and started connecting with them and saying, have you ever thought about being a teacher? And so and now they're going into a 1-year teacher training program. that gets our workforce diversified a lot longer. So that's a really key strategy. I think part of our policy and research group is to capture those key strategies. I think it'd be great for us to all talk about which ones seem to be high leverage. Is there a way to really scale them up? Because again, remember, these are pilot projects. They're not scaled up. So I think a part of our job is to find out which strategies seem to be making the difference and think about how to scale those up. That's real important. And the other thing I think about is, I don't think in this granting process, I mean, I've been involved in a grants in my career where they want certain outcomes and they kind of have a coach who's calling you all the time and saying, how are you coming on that? So I'm not sure, and again, this could be a great role for this committee or an extended community who cares about this, bringing more people in. Is someone connecting with those people just to keep asking, how are you doing around this very important outcome of closing the achievement gap in providing support and coaching? So I think the analysis is critical before we make assumptions.
Well, I think that I think we do need to answer a really important question, which is, do we have a targeted strategy around closing the achievement gap, or are we going to fund sort of business as usual and wait for the data to come in and to see if things have changed based on some, language in the RFP? And I may have more information because I have taken the time to look closely at the grants made, and I am in the business of grant making. And what I can share with you is that at Northwest Health Foundation, when we politely suggested people pay attention to equity and hoped that people would focus on the communities who have the greatest health disparities, they never actually made changes in their grants or in their outcomes or their activities until we said we will not fund initiatives that don't prove and have those outcomes, and there has to be a specific strategy. So, I appreciate that we don't want to make assumptions. I think that's very wise, and I think that we need to make a little bit clearer of a statement if we want to really have a targeted strategy, or if it's more of a kind of wait and see model.
I don't think it's an either or. I think there is a third way, and I'm going to encourage us to pursue that. I think some of what Nancy said would help with respect to that, and it might be helpful to have conversations with Rob or David Batista, who's the assistant superintendent for equity programs, about some of the ways that they are monitoring the grants with respect to their equity outcomes. I believe we can be informed in terms of that process. And I also agree with Nicole. I don't think we can wait forever, and we have to see if what we're incentivizing is creating the kind of change. But we also have to be open to the fact that there are some points along that incentive trail that are significant and meaningful. That we need to pay attention to.
So one thing, building on what a number of you have said in terms of interim metrics, the ODE has identified October 31st as the deadline where they are going to be producing reports on the strategic investments. And so what you have in your packet are two documents that are really fairly drafty. They're straight out of what we're using at ODE with each of the individual strategic initiatives, and we're looking for input on this approach, and it resonates with a lot of what you guys folks have said about we need to see student results, but also student results sometimes take a long time to take effect. But there usually are things you can measure right out the gate that are meaningful. So one of the handouts is entitled Strategic Investments Planning Template, and that template is going out to every person at ODE who manages a grant, and they're being asked specifically about the long-term outcomes, the interim metrics that Brian Reeder, who is an analyst, assistant superintendent and analyst at ODE, and I are working with them on. And there's other data questions they're being asked for every single grant is filling this out. And when we talk about Nancy's question about, well, what practices are you using? This is another way to follow up, not just on their grant application, Nancy, but also now as they fill this out, what are some specific things that they are doing from the manager's perspective. Then the second handout, which doesn't have a title, but it's a grid which shows universal on the left-hand side, and then across the top it says evidence, technical assistance, reporting and accountability, and others. This is what each individual grant manager is being provided to prompt them to begin to figure out what data they're going to be collecting on an interim basis. And so if you look at under the word where it says evidence, SI, strategic initiatives are making a difference for educators and students, that box, that rectangle there, is critically important for this group to think about right now and give some feedback to, because what it shows is that for instance, it says all early reading initiatives must do this. All post-secondary aspiration initiatives must do this. Then there's one about World of Work, and then there's one about network of teaching, quality teaching and learning. Those 4 categories are the universe of investments. There is no strategic investment that we funded that doesn't fit within one of these 4. And what is true about these is we've attempted to align and specify particular limited sets of outcomes that every one of these individual measures needs to collect data on. And the question is, now that we're 1 month or 6 months or 7 months into these grants going forward, what are the interim measures that are critical to collect with respect to outcomes? And I'm bringing it to this committee because there's been a lot of discussion about how do we disaggregate these measures and how do we collect measures that are informative as to what the final measures are going to be. So I'll give you one example that's come up. There's a question of the number of students who are reading at grade level in grade 3. Well, if a school or a district or a nonprofit or whatever has gotten a grant and their activity is working with students in the 1st grade and they've been at it for 6 months, what are they going to use as an interim measure? And you might immediately say, another reading test. So we'll give them another reading test. And there's a lot of interesting discussion among teachers about, just give them another test. Because, just give them another test is, just take them out of instruction for one more period of the day to collect that data. So I hear this argument all the time. More testing is an equity issue. So let's be really careful about just reflexively saying more testing, because who gets tested? It's often students in the gap, often students who are in underrepresented populations. It has the unintended consequence of actually making the gap bigger. So that's one thing to think about. Another thing to think about is the number of students who are reading at grade level in grade 3, to a large extent, ultimately is determined by the attitudes of their teachers. Do they believe every student can learn? Have they been trained or have they gone to develop their own capacity to be more culturally responsive in the instruction that they give? So would it be important to look at metrics? And I know we just said at the table, I'm sorry, I don't remember who said it, but I think it was Julia, we don't want to measure just activities, we want to measure outcomes. And I hear you. It's really important not to get in the trap of, we did all these activities, but there's been no student outcomes. I hear that. At the same time, there are some adult outcomes that are predictive of future student success. So I think we need to be maybe discerning and are there some activities or outcomes that are important to measure? So I'll stop talking in just a second with the prompt of ODE is asking Brian Reeder and I to inform all of these different grant leaders on interim measures. And what I'm interested in is much input as possible from this group. What interim measures are critical for us to be collecting that are indicative of activities that are really going to be closing the gap, other than just more testing? I understand the more testing thing. We certainly can test second grade reading and disaggregate that data. But I'm very, very interested in other thoughts around assessment.
So I have two comments.
Okay, thank you.
That are just very general. First of all, I think this is a draft. I would say those first 4 questions about evidence, each one of those sentences should have the word student in it, because I think that will lead to a really sharpened focus on what our focus is, and it's not activity. So if this is something that actually impacts adults, but ultimately it's only of value, an impact on an adult, if it ultimately has a positive impact on a student.
Excellent.
So embedding in the questions the concept that we're interested in student outcomes and impacts on students, because none of the word student doesn't appear anywhere in here. Then the second piece is, I think you can, again, sort of sharpen a focus by having the general question and then a sort of second, for each of them, having a parallel question around the achievement gap. And so if a grant isn't focused on the achievement gap, that they would need to say that, but that if you ask the question generally, I think most districts or grantees are going to answer it in a general concept and not with some may provide detail on the achievement gap or disaggregated data, but if you start with the broad question and then a really sharp focus and how does this specifically get at the opportunity gap, the students in the opportunity gap, that you'll get, I think, a much better understanding of whether it's a focus or not.
Thank you.
And I guess the only thing is, I almost feel like number 4, while I think anecdotal information is important, I'm afraid that you'll get people will sort of pivot to that as the sort of easy out, like here's some anecdotal information. So I think that's a bonus question, not the core.
But what I'm hearing also might even be a detour or diversion from.
Well, I think it's good to ask, because I do think sometimes an anecdote or story can really provide sort of a compelling illustration. So I'm not opposed to it. I just don't want people to think that's a substitute for real information.
I want to agree with Julia. I occasionally do. And suggest
we agree
that
a lot.
I know. And suggest that also might have the anecdotal hopefully leads us to doing some systematic case study, which leads us to some best practice, which then informs the other kind of work that we're doing. So I don't want to lose the anecdotal, but I want us to march in a way that becomes helpful. I think there's a place here, and I'm not completely sure where I want to refer to it, though, that looks at the whole process of educator preparation, and particularly the preparation of educators of color, from not just being in pipeline programs in teacher preparation, whether it's undergraduate or graduate, but going through the certification process and becoming actual teachers who are out in classrooms across the state. And I think until we see that whole process and where the barriers are and the lacks of success, if you will, we really won't understand what kinds of levers we need to pull and where we need to incentivize some different kinds of behaviors.
Peter, I wanted to make sure we acknowledge another board member who got
Oh, I'm
here.
sorry. Thank you very much. Yes.
And make sure we get her voice in the room. So, Harriet, welcome.
Oh, thank you. I was talking to me. Okay.
Yeah.
I was reading your chart. Thank you very much.
You don't usually sneak in.
No.
No.
I'm intently looking and thinking about this.
So do you have any comments at this point, or?
Not really, except that when I'm writing on this sheet are the things that just jumped out in my head when I just read at it and looked at it in general. And for me, some of the things that just immediately popped out were sort of a couple of things, like Julia said, I'm thinking the focus should be on students, but I'm also thinking that I'm just dealing, for instance, with the kindergarten. If one of your pieces of evidence in this first column here was all early reading initiatives must collect the number of children in kindergarten who are ready to learn, and that's based on the kindergarten assessment data. My thinking was, where is the follow-up? What's the so what of that? So you know that number, so what? I mean, what does that help you know? Because at no point going down do you then say, did the teacher make the instructional change that the data indicated needed to happen? Were there different kinds of integrations of the families? The reason you put the kindergarten readiness assessment in place, I mean, it doesn't monitor the very values that were put forth or the goals that were put forth when the kindergarten readiness assessment was created. And that's kind of what I'm seeing, seems to be sort of like a trend in some of these topics. For instance, I'm assuming you want an increased number of the minority teachers who currently are teaching and speak a different language, but it just says changes, so that could be a downward change. So you understand what I'm saying? It's just some things like that are immediately popping out. I'd have to think a little bit more to give you anything more in depth, but just as a cursory glance, I'm thinking that there needs to be things that answer the question of, once you have the data, what that data pointed you to do next. So we're not just constantly ruminating about how good or how bad this is. That we actually saw some changes were made based on the data that got collected and the money that was given or whatever else, and there were some next steps, and there needs to be something in here that indicates that people are reporting that out, and I'm not quite seeing that.
And I just believe, again, I don't see as much theory of action or strategies here. I see a question about what's an innovative practice. Well, I think we really have to capture what people think the strategy is that's going to move the dial on the outcomes for kids, and really be able to look at that against research or whatever and make sure the strategies that have been chosen, or if we start to compare the different groups, we have the grants and see one's making a bigger difference and outcomes for kids and another isn't, what does that really say? Because we owe it to all of the children in the state of Oregon, not just the ones in the pilot, to get the outcome. And we're going to have to learn from the pilots to make sure we get them.
Other comments?
Nancy, how, I mean, I know you've been doing some projecting and looking at how things go. Do we have a good systemized way for bringing what we learn in this back to the best practice to then change behavior? Have we done that in some, or started to do that?
I think this conversation's been really helpful to inform that. I really think that our policy and research group, which is a small group, it's going to be a group of 4 people when it's all staffed up, but there's also ODE, and they have research and policy people, and then there's all our partners, like our university partners, all of the other people who are looking at best practices to really move the outcomes and equity. The other thing I think is really critical, which we haven't done yet. So I think we have a beginning strategy. That would be great to bring back to this group and get informed. I think that would be wonderful. But the other piece is since we've been saying 40-40-20, and we've been talking about equity, and we've really made commitments in equity lens, people all over the state are adopting equity lens, and there's people working on stuff that didn't get grants, but they're working on it because, they're partners with us. I'm just going to use this as a small conversation, but Sean Dean, and I know this is her dissertation, but she has mentors in a school who have been working with kids to really help their achievement get up. And she said something to me that was pretty profound. She said, we didn't choose necessarily the highest academic kids or the kids who were perceived as the leaders. We chose other kids who had experienced problems themselves and turned it around. And we're finding that that might be a really important, maybe you want to talk about it. No, you go, because it's yours.
Sure. We piloted a near-peer mentoring grant where we have 12th graders mentor 9th graders because we're seeing our 9th graders flounder even with all the supports that we put in. But we first chose we did it with one person, and there was this hot shot, leader in the school, and there was the mentor and the mentee didn't really connect as well. The mentee could not see herself in the mentor. So we went and chose a whole bunch of mentors that sort of struggled through high school, and then when they were seniors, we matched them up with a certain amount of freshmen, and these freshmen could see themselves in these mentors, and the mentors could relate to these 9th graders saying, I know what you're thinking. I thought that too. I know what you want to do. That's a mistake. Here's how we can do it. I understand. Let me help you get out of the hole that you dug for yourself because I've been there. So our initial strategy didn't work. Our second one, we're seeing immediate results.
So those, to me, are the powerful things of what can we scale up and how can we put best practices out. And I think this is part of you did get a mentor grant, right? But there's other people working on this stuff who haven't gotten grants. And sometimes through the regional collaboratives, they hear about what each other are doing and they do it. So I think we've really got to start capturing that stuff too.
Agreed.
And that's what you would consider the anecdotal information?
I'm not seeing that these are necessarily the right questions to get there, but I think we've got to get something that really leads us to best practice so we can scale it up across the state.
I hear that as a question maybe of what's your theory of action. Maybe if we could ask a question as well, what's your, and it kind of goes back to your kindergarten question. Okay, well, so what?
Right.
What'd you do? And it would be great to take a look at that. Nicole, are you still on, and did you have some additional comments for this planning work?
Yeah, I'm listening intently, and I think my only comment I would have is I think we have to be really careful about making any kind of broad statements that people are using the equity lens. I actually think for the most part people are still not using the equity lens, and so I think we should celebrate and feel pride when there are instances of people using it, but I just would shy away from that language, even as someone who's fiercely proud of the equity lens and really wants everyone to use it. We got a long way to go before we're there, and so I would hate us to reference it being broadly used, and then if we are in an unfortunate position where outcomes aren't better,
right?
People may have the perception that we did an equity lens and it didn't work. I just want us to be thoughtful about that as we go along and work towards getting people to actually use it.
Is there a way that we can, with Nicole's point there, is there a way we can be a little bit more deliberate and certainly, I was going to say call out, that's the wrong word, but support those that are really doing some work with the equity lens, that are breaking new ground, that are really putting the equity lens to work as a part of our best practices at this level, to say that there's, I'm looking at an example of the use of the equity lens and the equity principles, and these are some of the ways that it's being used, and this is how they're doing this there, and this is how they're doing this here, and we're seeing some promise from the results. I mean, of being very deliberate, not deliberative. That's us academics, but of being very deliberate in terms of saying there's a great equity lens at X place that's the partnership of X school and X community college, and it's really doing these kinds of things that we've listed here and giving us early evidence, and it's something that we would say to people around the state, pay attention to that. That's beginning to look like something that's going on. I don't know, a way to raise that, because we've been talking equity lens for a year. Some of us have been talking it, this is my 39th year in education. But some ways to call attention to where that equity lens is beginning to show evidence of things.
So I'm just going to put out, we could take that back and maybe bring that as an agenda item forward with some immediately 3 or 4 things sprung to mind. Part of it is this network of quality teaching, which is meant to be a mechanism to highlight that and to build on that. But I'm just looking at the time. I think maybe bringing that up as an agenda item. It might be something that's the business of the committee. We've talked about a highly visible platform for engagement. I wonder if that might be a way to I don't know, but I feel like it's a great topic, but we're at 10 o'clock, and does that work for you?
Works for me.
Okay, I love the suggestion. I'd love to do it. So Nicole, is it okay if I say one more thing about this item and then we at least get one more done?
Yes. I was actually just thinking that it may have been the cause of us taking so long, and I apologize.
No, this is so rich. I mean, we're taking down tons of notes. It's very helpful. The last thing I want to say on this item, and I would like to get some input, and also if there's community members in the audience who are willing to stay after and talk with me about this, I'd be very interested. One thing that came up at our ODE meeting about the strategic investments was the importance of disaggregated data. And we are funding quite a number of non-public school partners to do this work, after school, community-based partners, what have you, who are serving kids and whose goals are equitable outcomes. And when I asked the managers of those grants about data collection, we got into a conversation about collecting race and ethnicity data. And to a K-12 person, that's the law. I am always asking families, please let me know your race and ethnicity. So it's second nature, and I know that conversation in the school when you're enrolling can be a tricky one, but I've done this for years. I sort of understand how that works. The community partners involved in this is for some of them, and this is something Serena and I talked about yesterday at the meeting. Some of our community partners understand the reason why we're collecting that data, and it's no prob, and it's an easy ask, and it goes pretty fluidly. But apparently with other community members, it's never been part of their enrollment process with a student, and it's very difficult to do that question at that moment of enrollment. And I just wanted to share it with the committee, maybe just for information, but also to anyone out here who's hearing this, any advice that you could give to us in terms of what we say to community organizations would be helpful. One thing I've heard is, if you can make it really, really clear how collecting that data helps serve historically underrepresented children in a letter, maybe something from Nancy, from the board, or something, or just a personal contact of, hey, this is why we're asking, that can go a long way if people understand it. And maybe if they then can communicate that to the families that they're serving. The reason I'm asking you this question is because we're about equitable outcomes for all Oregonians, and if you tell us a little bit about yourself, it helps us get better. So that's one thing I've heard, is better communication about why we're asking. But if there's any other thoughts folks have about this, because it really is new work, and I think we hope to broaden funding of communities, organizations, over time, even beyond what we're doing now. So it's going to come up and come up and come up.
So Peter, I won't take any time, except for to say there are many, many organizations who've been doing this very, very well in just about every community I can think of. And so I'm happy to connect you with those resources. And there's also a mountain of research about the importance and best practices in the way to do it. So I don't think we need to, I won't spend time talking about it except for to commit to helping you offline with another conversation.
Okay, thank you. So we have 2 more agenda items and 19 minutes, and then do we have folks signed up for public comment? We do not. Anyone in the audience not signed up who does want to do public comment? I just don't want to miss out on that so we do. Is that typically 3 minutes or 5 minutes? Okay. So
just, I have to leave right at 10:30, so I want to make sure that I hear the public testimony, so we can map backwards from 10:30.
Nicole, one option would be that we do the public comment right now, to make sure that we don't get swept away in a discussion on the work plan and then don't get to it, I'll leave that up to.
Yeah, I think that's a good option.
Okay, so sir, if you're ready, we'd like to hear your public comment.
Still signing the public.
Oh, got it, okay. And is there something in particular that we read before public comment, or?
No.
No.
But we tell them that we appreciate them coming and that they have 3 minutes.
Got it.
And they can submit something in writing now or later.
Okay. That's okay. Now I know as a board member. So welcome, and if you could state your name for the record.
I'm Dr. Dapo Shabu Mahim, and of course I operate the Operation Easy, which is at-risk kids. But I have questions for you. I was just wondering if you have specific committee that deals with the issue that we're dealing with, the achievement gap. Do you have any specific committee?
I don't know if I should answer. I'm not sure of the protocol for this, so.
So, if I may, I don't know, Nicole, if you're okay. So generally, the purpose of public testimony is for us to listen to questions that, or to listen to your testimony versus a ongoing dialogue. But I would think the achievement gap would, just a short response would be either this committee or some of the other committees, depending on what aspect of it is. But generally, this is an opportunity for public testimony for you to share your thinking or perspective on things with the members of the committee.
Because it just seems to me that I'm getting the impression that you discuss this in every committee. You don't have a specific committee to deal with this issue. I don't know. Because it's a critical issue. It's a very, very serious issue. You are getting to that point where this country has to educate the minorities. We've got to get them up to the par. They've got to be educated. We've got to take it seriously. We've got to take it seriously. It's just, I don't know. We talk a lot about this stuff. We've been talking about it forever, for so long. I don't know when we're going to start doing that. To do it, I hear the target strategy. It's a good word. But how are we going to do that? What are we going to do to educate the black kids and the Latinos? To get them educated, to be part of what is happening in the world. When are we going? What is it going to take? You speak about it eloquently. You've got all the vocabulary. You've got the grammar. You've got all this stuff. But when are we going to do it? You write it very well. You talk about it well. But to implement it, to put into practice, to do it, get these kids sitting down in front of teachers and get them educated. Oh, for God's sake, I don't know. I've got a Saturday school where kids are coming to me, 6th, 7th graders. They can't borrow. They can't add, just to carry. It's so shameful. It's so bad. And of course, you see it. We lock them up. We put them in prison. They kill each other in the community. I buried so many kids. I don't know how I got here. I finished my doctorate degree at UC San Diego and I moved here a few years ago. The first thing I faced with in that Albana community, MLK area, the church that I was attending then, we were burying all these black kids, killing each other. And of course I came from a village where those kids, as you talk about it, it's not a cliche for us. It's not just words. The kids belong to the community. Everybody is part of their life. The schools, we, the people around them, we're disconnected, we're disjointed. We don't have any community around the kids. I hope you have that as part of your strategy. I talked to Dr. Golden about this, to have a community around the kids. The school belongs to the kids, the teachers, in a celebratory time, in a celebratory area, to celebrate the kids, the life of a kid, get them educated. But we can't do it. If I didn't see this stuff, let me just try to be selfish about it. If I didn't see it, it probably won't bother me that much. But for me to see it, as someone who came out of that little place out of nowhere in West Africa, came here a long time ago, Georgetown University, all over the place. Then to come to realize that you can't educate this little kid in front of you. This little kid. Before I stop, just few, on Friday, they brought a little kid. They're trying to put him in a foster home, 6 years old. 6 years old boy. Oh, for God's sake, what are we doing in this country? They've been trying to place him, to put him in a foster home, a black boy. They said he can't stay in the classroom. He's fighting with everybody. And then we had almost 12 people in there talking about him, about this little boy. They happened to bring him to us, right there. This little boy, Dr. Golden, this boy, a little boy that belonged to us. This kid just eating cookies in the classroom, just having fun in the classroom. Are you kidding me? No, seriously. Are we taking this seriously? Are we seeing a human being? A human personality, a human being, a person, just like us. With this case. I hope, because honestly, please, you've got to forgive me. After a PhD in American schools and all this, I'm not into paperwork. I'm into just do something with this kid. What I've been doing with them for the past 28 years, you can't believe how people are asking me, do you write anything down? I don't write anything down. I don't want to write. Write what? I'm there with them. I am there. Because that's what they want. They want to have fun. Kids must have fun. Dr. Golden, that's what we need to do with them. I don't know how you evaluate fun. I don't know how you do it. I don't even know how you write it. But do it. Get them together. Fun. So, before I leave you alone, very quickly, you've got some question here, your presentation template and instructions. Are those questions for your committees or for the public? I mean, for the public? There are a series of them. Very interesting question. Are those for you to answer them?
They are a draft set of questions that we're asking for community groups to answer. Anytime they're asking for money to go forward, new investments, these are the kinds of questions we're asking those groups to answer. And many, many different groups are answering those questions.
So for the community, non-profit that come to you to book it. All right, good. Let's take this thing very seriously.
Thank you.
I think we go to that point. We've got to that point. We've had enough wars all over the place. Let's just educate these kids in this country. Let's just do it. Let's put a hat in there. The hat, let's do it. Thank you for giving me the chance to.
Thank you. And do we have another person who wants to speak? No?
Go
go sign it first?
I don't know. I'm not sure what the,
I'll get it later.
okay.
Yeah.
All right.
My name is Helen Lizarraga, and I am the Executive Director for the Center for Intercultural Innovation. I have been working dissecting that equity lens for a year now and developing strategies to apply it practically. My background has been in mental health and social work and working, linking families to education systems. And what I'm seeing, I think this is fabulous work that you're all doing. But one of the areas that I think that we need to start looking at is how are we measuring behavior change? The equity lens, really those beliefs, each one of those beliefs lends itself to behavioral change patterns. We've looked at that very closely, are developing toolkits around it. But I really believe that the behavioral changes in the professional development piece of education is really what is going to move us forward. I think systemic change is great because you have to organize to make sure consistent messages are given around funding investments. But my experience has been, even looking at some of the funding investments and RFPs that I've reviewed for the ODE Equity Unit, there just seems to be this very surface reference to the equity lens. I read one in the early learning grants the other day, and one of their goals was the realization of the equity lens. And I thought, what does that mean? So thank you very much, but I just wanted to say that that really looking closely at developing a rubric around specific behavior change in professional development practices for teachers and administrators and superintendents would be very useful in moving this forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So in the remaining time, I'd like to point folks to agenda item 5.0 and 6.0. 5.0 is the committee work plan, and my intent, and we didn't get there today, but I'd like to discuss this and perhaps get some pre-thinking before our next meeting to guide us. My intent is to work with the committee to build a work plan month by month of when we're going to do what and when we're going to be finished with each step, and to hold us accountable to that work, to hold OEIB staff accountable and also to hold the committee accountable to achieving certain goals. And in order to do that, we have to sort through what are the initiatives that we're working on, what are the nature of some of those, or what's the nature of some of the work that we're working on? Is it a policy recommendation to the legislature? Is it a funding thing? Is it something that we're doing in partnership with other agencies? I see Iris here. Some of our work has to do with out-of-school youth, and there's a key partnership work that we want to work with Iris on. So there's different kinds of work that we need to do. Some of it can be done fairly quickly, immediately, as gentlemen said before in our testimony. Some of it takes a little bit more time. So in order to do that, we need to look at our work. And the handout that I gave at the very beginning of the meeting, I was hoping would be a springboard into that conversation. So I'd like the committee to refer to the ongoing or new work that's been proposed that's listed on this handout, and ask some critical questions between now and the next meeting so that you're prepared. And I'll be giving you some documents regarding which of these we need to do first, which of these need to be done immediately, which of these are maybe a little bit more long-term, and like I said before, which of these are policy, which of these are money. I can give you a handout to do some pre-thinking before the next meeting, but I think it's really incumbent upon us to select our most important ones or our lowest hanging fruit, or however you want to think of it, and get to work on those right away. Agenda item 6.0 is a framework for addressing 3 of the major work products for this group. So 6.0 is youth, out-of-school youth investment and policy framework. And if you look at my handout, you'll see that That framework is about the GED, increasing support for Oregonians getting the GED, especially underrepresented students, improving alignment among the systems that serve out-of-school youth, and supporting positive and successful options for students, including alternative options that are out there for students. That's a lot of work. Those three things are a lot. And I think and I was hoping we'd get to agenda item 6.0 to have a discussion about priorities. Some of the work in this out-of-school youth framework, to be honest, is the work of the Youth Development Division. And we can maybe be a partner or a very direct supporter of that work, but we shouldn't necessarily be leading it. Other work no one is doing, like supporting a framework to look at alternative schools. That might be something that we take head on. So we really don't have enough time to dig into the discussion, but I wanted to preview it for you, let you know that you'll be getting some documentation before your next meeting about this so that you can make some choices. And our goal at the next meeting is to get this work plan nailed down so that we can really, like I said, hold ourselves accountable to particular deliverables. And the 2 minutes left, I'd just like to see if there's a response, and I'm always open to emails and phone calls from the committee about specifically what you've heard and what you want to be doing in the work plan. But if there's anything for the good of the order that you'd like to say at the end, I'm interested in hearing it while it's hot on your mind. Julia?
So I have just, I guess, maybe it's taking the work plan and what we just decided are priorities, but to try and structure our meetings so that I'm a little bit disappointed we didn't get to the GED discussion.
Right.
Because that seems to be the core of the work, is to try and structure our meetings so that we're going after the most important, or what maybe our priority item, and then back map into more of the administrative or things that maybe we can do in a virtual way, if we need to, a virtual forum versus in the committee structure.
Thank you.
And this is Nicole, and I think, so one thing I would say, Peter, is this committee's actually spent a ton of time on the work plan. Every time we've gotten a new staff person, we've redone the work plan. So I would just caution you to not I think we need to set priorities and figure out what we can accomplish in the remainder of the year. Yes, I don't want to spend a lot of more time rewriting our fourth edition of a work plan. And the other piece I would say is I think this committee is very open to, it's one of those areas is really the work of the Youth Development Commission. I think we've repeatedly tried to invite them to give us language that maybe we could adopt in support of them. So I don't think we want to recreate work that we don't need to be doing. If we can take something off our plate, that would be great, and focus on an area where there is a need and appropriate leadership. We're just looking for maybe you and Nancy to help us navigate that with the Youth Commission or ODE or wherever, so we can spend our time in the best way that will be most meaningful. I suspect the GED and the alternative schools are an area where there is a need for some large policy support. So just direct us. We don't want to be stepping on anyone's toes.
Yeah, actually Iris is with us.
And might I say a few things here? So one of the things, Nicole, I would agree with you that there are probably any number of areas where you could focus your time, but I would hope that you would not take your eyes off of this particular prize, the one about out-of-school youth, and that you all as a committee would continue to at least ensure that there is work going on in this area and that we are bringing folks together to discuss it. One of the areas around this issue, whether we're talking about dropout youth or homeless youth or the youth who are no longer in our systems, that I think that we really need to focus on has to do with the whole idea of discipline in terms of the suspensions and expulsions that are happening. There are a number of young folks who, not of their own accord, are out of school. And if we don't begin to address that, it's become a national problem, particularly for kids of color, and particularly now, it's going down into the elementary schools. So you have young kids who are being suspended or expelled from school as early as 6 years old. And that cannot happen. So when we talk about out-of-school youth, I really want to make sure that that definition includes the number of kids that our institutions are putting out of school. It's not of their own accord. So that's an area, because as we take a look at the Youth Development Council's work, as we take a look at that, we're calling these young folks opportunity and priority youth. And as we look at the opportunity youth, those youth ages 16 to 24 who are neither in school or working, as you take a look at who they are, in this state, there are about 66,000 young people in this state who are not in school or working, who are in that particular age range. They are out of school youth, they are out of work youth, they are not connected. And then when you take a look at our priority youth, those youth who are anywhere from 6 up to about 15 or so, these youth who are tangentially engaged in school are the youth that we find a significant number who are being expelled and suspended from school. Again, out of school not because they've dropped out, not because of any other issues, but simply because the institution that is to educate them has decided that they need not be in those environments. So I think we need to begin to take a look. I'm very concerned about the number of kids, particularly in Oregon. In fact, I have some data from the Juvenile Rights Project that just recently came out on the number of kids in Oregon who are being suspended. And it's absolutely above the national average. It just doesn't make sense that as we try to do this work, all of us together, as we try to move forward with this work, and as we try to engage young folks and keep them on target towards successful outcomes, that we have another sort of institution that, as we're trying to do our work, is literally sending them out the door. So it's almost like it's a self-defeating kind of process if we don't stop some of the behaviors that are causing these young people to become disassociated with school. So, and some of those are behaviors based on our own policies. And we talked about this a little bit yesterday in terms of taking a look at policies that may actually be in the way or barriers to learning. And so the policies that we put in place, and we have had some progress on this. We had House Bill 2192 that came forth that actually began to take a look at the discipline and suspension and look at what we're doing in this area. So I think we're on a really good track. There's some committees within the Department of Education that are looking at this. We're on a really good track to beginning to address it, but clearly too many young people in this state are being suspended or expelled from school. And we really do need to kind of stop the upstream so that we can really deal with the issues that are before us. So those would be my comments about this particular area in terms of where we need to focus some of our attention.
I think that's great. I mean, I think we're so rough in our draft of this policy. We don't have a preamble. We don't have anything yet. So, I mean, but what I will tell you anecdotally is I think the intent of this particular body of work is to really, we're trying to talk about those youth and those driving issues. So it would be great if we could partner with you, Iris, between now and the next meeting to improve that document and bring it much further along than where it is now. So we'd love your insight and partnership going forward.
Absolutely.
And I know I have to go, and I think other committee members do as well. So I want to invite Peter to close us out if he can.
Yeah, I'll just say message received loud and clear. I think the work plan doesn't need a ton of work. We need to do some work, and some of that's going to be done between now and the next committee meeting. Thank you all very much, and I look forward to seeing you at the next meeting.
Thanks, everyone.